In this video I'm going to show you how to replace the center diff bearing, the bearing that is in the slipper clutch that's installed in this 4x4 Slash, as well as the rear transmission bearings. First thing we're going to do is remove the rear end from the vehicle. There's 4 screws that need to be removed. They are located here and here. You'll see that they're in the gray plastic. Get a good view of that. So these 2 screws need to be removed, as well as these 2 screws to pull the rear end off the vehicle. These 4 screws are all the same size, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up. And all we need to do is pull the rear section straight back. What I'm going to do is put my finger on the drive, the center shaft, and just keep that in place, and just go ahead and pull this apart. Just give it a little wiggle, and it'll just come apart. I'm still going to hold on to that drive shaft, and I'm going to pull the slipper clutch out as well. We're going to put that to the side. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to replace the bearing in the slipper clutch. The center diff bearing came off with the assembly, so I'm just going to go ahead and this will come right off. Now I'm going to put that off to the side. Now we need to remove this spline from the slipper clutch. Take that off. Now there is a nut that adjusts the tension on the spring for the slipper clutch. We need to remove that completely, and it's an 8mm wrench that I'm going to use to remove this nut. Just hold the whole assembly and just go ahead and spin it. Go ahead, take the nut off completely. We're going to remove the spring, and there's a bushing here that we're going to remove. You'll note that the cone faces the spur gear. We're going to have to remove that. Now, your whole assembly will come apart at this point. We're going to make sure, we're just going to go ahead and leave this disc on the assembly. I just want to show you that there are notches in this. We want to make sure that the round notches line up with the pegs that are in this plate. So we'll go ahead and put those back on for now and set that to the side. Just go ahead and grab one of your wrenches. Just going to go ahead from the back side and just press the bearing out of the spur gear. Put that to the side. And we're going to be installing Boca bearing, yellow seal ceramic bearings. Just go ahead and press that back into the spur gear. We're going to put this back on our assembly. We're going to make sure that we line the disc up with the notches. Go ahead, put your spur gear assembly back on. Just kind of hold that in place. We're going to go ahead, reinstall this bushing, and you want to make sure that the cone is facing the bearing. Go ahead and slide that back on. We're going to put our spring back on. Go ahead, just finger tighten this nut. Go ahead, just make sure you just squeeze this assembly, make sure that this plate stays in place, and just tighten that up. Now, for mine, I just tighten it up all the way. It's up to you how tight you want to make this assembly. And we're going to go ahead and reinstall the spline on the slipper clutch. Now, it is keyed to only fit in one way, so just go ahead and line the set screw up with the flat in your slipper clutch. We'll go ahead and put that back on. And you could press this down all the way and tighten it, but I actually will lift it up about a 1/16 of an inch or so and tighten that back up just to take a little of that play out of that dry shaft. Alright, and that's done. We're going to go ahead and just set that to the side. Now we're going to do the rear end. First step, we're going to go ahead and pull the rear bumper off of the rear assembly. This is a platinum edition, so it does have a sway bar. So first step here is to loosen up the screws that hold the sway bar in place. And you do not have to remove them, just loosen them up enough that you can actually get that bar out. Now there's 5 screws holding the rear bumper on this assembly. There's 2 on the top, 1 in the back, and then 2 in the bottom. Just go ahead and remove all of those screws. Now, this screw and the 2 top screws, they're all the same size, same length, so you don't have to worry about mixing those up. And go ahead and pull these lower 2 out. And these 2 screws are much shorter, so it'll be easy to keep those separate. Pull that off. Now your rear bumper should just pull straight back. Wiggle that off. Put that to the side. And you can go ahead and remove this rear plate that's holding the hinge pins, the inner hinge pin holder. Go ahead and just set that aside with the bumper. Now, next step, I'm going to go ahead and remove the top bolts holding the shocks on. Now, there is a washer that is in between the shock and the shock tower. Just make sure you keep an eye on that and don't lose that. Pull both sides off. And I'm going to go ahead and just leave the lower bolt in the shock. We can just let those hang. Set those off to the side. I'm going to go ahead, just for the ease of disassembly, just going to go ahead and pull the rear sway bar off of the rear arms. Just go ahead and do both sides. Go ahead and pull the rear sway bar off and just put that to the side. Next, we're going to remove the 2 screws retaining the upper camber links. What I'm going to do with these is, when you pull them out, go ahead and just put the screws back in the holes you removed them from. It'll just keep you from putting them back in the wrong positions later. So go ahead and pull those out. And we're just going to go ahead and just finger tighten those, just put those back in. Alright, next up, I'm going to go ahead and just pull the rear shock tower off. There's 4 screws retaining the rear shock tower. They are different lengths. The upper 2 screws are shorter. Go ahead and just remove all 4 of those screws. And the rear shock tower just pulls straight up. Just put that to the side. Now, at this point, there's only 2 screws holding the rear diff in place, and we're just going to remove those 2. They're actually a different size. Go ahead, pull those out. Now at this point, your rear diff is free. You can go ahead, just pull it straight up. And pull it out, pull the drive shafts out. Go ahead, put this assembly to the side. Your diff halves will come right apart here. Now, this output gear, we'll just go ahead and it will probably fall right out. Just pull that right out of the front diff casing, and there's a bearing in here, and just go ahead and just take one of your wrenches and just press it out. It may be loose enough that you can just use your finger, but let's see here. Yeah, go ahead and just take that bearing right out of there. We'll go ahead and put our yellow seal bearing in here. Just drop that in place. And go ahead and drop our output gear back in. Just set that to the side for now. We need to replace the bearings on the rear diff here, so we need to remove these yokes. We'll go ahead and pull these screws out. Now these screws go all the way through the yoke, so loosen them up and then pull it out, and then you can slide the yoke straight off. And do the same for the other side. Pull it straight out, pull your yoke off. To remove these bearings, we're going to just use a flathead screwdriver and just kind of pry them up gently. Just work it around. Pull that off. Go ahead and do the other side. Pull that off. Now these bearings are 2 different sizes, so it'll be a lot easier not to mix them up. They will only go on one way. Just go ahead and just slide those back on. Just press them down all the way. and we're going to go ahead and reinstall our yokes. And these are splined. They can go either way. There's flats on each side. Just go ahead and slide those into place, press them down all the way, and we're going to take our set screw, just press that through, and tighten that up. And we're just going to tighten it up until it's flush with the yoke. Tighten out a little more. Go ahead and do the other side. Tighten it up. Alright, so your rear disc ready to go back in the housing. It can only fit in the housing in one direction due to the different size bearings. So we're going to go ahead and take the front half, and we're going to make sure the gear's on the bottom side just so it doesn't fall out on us, and go ahead and reinstall the diff. And it just drops on in there, spins freely, and we're going to go ahead and take the rear half, just place those together. And what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and reinstall that shock tower, the rear shock tower. Those bolts that you left in place, those will point towards the back side of the rear diff. Just go ahead, and it slides in between the two halves. Put that together, and we're going to go ahead and reinstall the screws for that shock tower to keep the halves together. The longer screws go in the lower holes, and shorter screws up top. Go ahead and tighten those up. Make sure it spins freely. We're going to go ahead and reinstall this in our rear suspension. So what we're going to do is we're just going to set this here, and we're going to key the rear drive shafts and just get those started. It'll be a lot easier if you leave this set on the off to the back to get these started. Slide them in, then go ahead and just drop your rear diff in place. And we're going to go ahead and reinstall the two screws, those last screws that we removed. Just remember, they are the ones with the smaller Allen wrench, just so it's easier to identify those. I'm going to go ahead and tighten those up. Now your rear housing will be secure. We can go ahead, we're going to reinstall the camber links. Just pull those screws out. Just put those back in those holes we identified. Tighten that up. Gonna reinstall our shocks. Gonna put the screw in, and we're gonna put that washer in place so it's in between the shock tower and the shock. Go ahead and start that, tighten it up. At this point, we're going to go ahead and put your inner hinge pin holder back in place. The flat part of this will go towards the top, and the notches will go to the bottom. Just go ahead and drop that back in place. We're going to reinstall the rear bumper. It slides in from the back. Slide the notches into that rear diff half. Get those in. Just allow that to fall back down. And drop these screws back in. Just go ahead and reinstall all 5 of the screws that hold that rear bumper in place. Alright. Next, we're going to go ahead and reinstall our sway bar. Just go ahead and work that through your rear suspension system. Make sure it goes up and over your camber links. Just go ahead and reinstall those. Now we're going to take that sway bar and get it up underneath those bolts we loosened up earlier. Just get it back up underneath those two, and we're going to tighten these back up. Now what I like to do is I usually do one side at a time, and I'll tighten it up until it stops, and then I'll back it up slightly and just make sure that there's a little bit of play in that sway bar so it's not completely locked up. I don't know how easy it'll be to see that, but just make sure that it'll move a little bit. There's just a little bit of tension there. I do one side so I can make sure I can identify how it feels and go ahead and tighten up the other side. Do the same thing. I just go ahead and tighten it all the way up until it stops and then back off a little bit and just make sure I get that same feel basically. Alright, once that's done, next step we're going to go ahead and install our center diff bearing into the chassis. And all it does is it just pops on in there. Slide that in. And go ahead and we're going to reinstall our slipper in this. Just go ahead and put that in there. And it's going to take a little bit of wiggling to get that spline lined up again. Just work that in there, push it in all the way, make sure you got it splined up correctly, just spin it. I did not remove the motor or the pinion gear, it just goes right back in there, same mesh. So at this point, there are two flat spots keying the rear output of the slipper. What I do is I usually kind of note where those are located. Right now I'm going to put the flat spots on the sides, and then I'm going to go ahead, take my rear section and come in here, and I'm going to look into that output gear and try to get those splines lined up in the same general direction, just so it's a little bit easier to work this back together. Alright. Now this may be a little bit difficult. It's just going to take a little bit of work sometimes to get these back together, to get all the splines lined back up. But you're going to notice on your rear half there's a little bit of plastic here. It's very thin. That little bit of plastic needs to fit underneath a notch that's in the chassis. So just keep an eye on that and make sure you get the plastic underneath the notch, and just work it until you get all the pieces together. So same thing, it slides in straight from the back. Wiggle, and that popped in. You see it's actually up underneath the notch. It's fully in. And what we're going to do is we're just going to spin this real quick, make sure we have free movement. Alright, we're going to go ahead and reinstall those 4 screws holding the rear suspension on. Alright, tighten those up, flip it over, 2 more screws, that screw, and you have successfully installed Boca bearing ceramic bearings in your 4x4 Slash.